Now you and I can get together. Let it start a revolution. Change the world to what it should be. And forget all this confusion. We can live together for the sake of love.
Hey guys, I'm churning out videos while I have energy. I feel quite alert and awake today, which is nice for me. I want to talk about global warming and the global warming conspiracy. Now, for those of you who don't know, the belief is that the planet is going through heating and cooling cycles of its own natural accord. And this is true and correct. You just need to check the science of the ice analysis in northern and southern aspects of the planet, so North Pole and South Pole. When they drill, they can determine when ice melted, when it thawed, so on and so forth. And they can see that is absolutely part of the living ecosystems of this planet, is heating and cooling. Now, the question is then, how much influence are we having on the current heating and cooling? Well, 98% or so is a huge amount of carbon monoxide put into the atmosphere is from natural sources. And by that I mean plant life that's dying on the forest floor and mulching, animals, termite, all that stuff, you know, volcanic outlets. All of that is adding to it without any shadow of a doubt. Algae on the ocean, as well as it dies off, creates it, but also at the same time uses it. So you have these massive, massive levels that are nothing to do with humankind. And if anything, you would say that by cutting down half of the world's forests, we're probably reducing that, surely. But it doesn't work that way, because then you leave way for grassland and grass dies and it mulches and it creates the same problem. However, what we can say is it would seem the planet is definitely heating and cooling naturally, or there were human civilizations doing it and we have no knowledge of them. It's the only option, because we know scientifically that the planet has heated and cooled many, many times. So what people believe is that this is just a natural thing that's happening. The planet is heating naturally. And because the planet is heating naturally, the powers that be in charge, the elitists, have seen that coming, and they've made a decision to try and manipulate it to steer the world in a direction they want it to go, having more control over people, and also for financial benefit. Now that comes as no surprise. You know, if you're in charge of the oil business and you're used to this hugely accustomed level of comfort, and that business is going to end, then of course you want to make sure you're at the forefront of whatever replaces it. Perfectly natural, normal human behavior, I'm sure, to do that. So, however, those persons are so powerful, we know their agenda is beyond money. We know that, you know, it's about their own wants and desires for the planet. So that is obviously definitely an option, that the planet is just heating of its own natural accord, and certain elitist humans, unsurprisingly, are trying to manipulate us into getting some benefit from that natural occurrence. The second possibility is indeed that extra output of greenhouse gases that we create is indeed adding on top of that, because it's not part of the natural cycles. That doesn't compute so well with me either, if I'm being perfectly honest. But the problem is there's a lot of bogus science out there. For instance, there's science saying that the polar bear population is currently larger than it was back in the 1930s. It just takes common sense to realise we couldn't do a census on polar bear populations with any accuracy in the 1930s as what we can now. So this information is bogus bullshit that I'm seeing all over the place. I'm not interested in it. But what does logically make a lot of sense to me is that our little bit of input from fossil fuels might not be creating the dramatic rise in temperature that we feel it is. It might be part of that natural cycle. I still know fossil fuels, however, are an extremely stupid thing, because they're from a finite resource which is integral to the planet's stability, and we just keep draining it and raping the planet of those finite resources. So of course we should stop burning fossil fuel if we can, and start using renewables. That makes absolute sense. But what it doesn't mean is that undoubtedly the planet, okay, let's say the planet is heating by human accord, okay, then of course there's something to discuss with everything that's going on with climate change. Let's say the planet is not heating because of burning fossil fuels. Let's say it's not. Let's say it's just happening naturally. It still doesn't make any sense to keep digging up oil, etc., and it's still a problem. You've still got people seeking oil when renewable energy is available as a technology in places like Virunga. Virunga is the last home of the mountain gorilla. Virunga, Burundi impenetrable forest, has a separate population. But Virunga, they're trying to drill for oil there and destroy the park. It just has to make sense that we stop using it first and foremost. So take the greenhouse gas emissions out of the equation. Oil's destructive even without burning it. It's destructive to habitat. It's destructive to the environment. Then you have, of course, transporting it, and we know what oil spills do. So even if we can find a way to not use it, we should. It doesn't matter if greenhouse gases are heating the planet or not. We should. We should stop using it. Likewise, habitat destruction is completely not important in the realm of greenhouse gases in most persons' minds, but this is ridiculous as well. We have cut down over half of the world's forests, that's a fact, and we've done so in the last 70 years. Now, if we don't stop, obviously, again, those are ecosystems we can't get back, and with it, we have amplified species extinction because of that behaviour that we cannot get back. We can't get these species back without their ecosystems, and they are dying at rates thousands of times higher than natural extinction rates. That's plant and sentient life. So, what I'm trying to get at here is to paint two sides of this story. So, number one, I will say I'll agree that there's probably an elitist agenda to manipulate climate change to gain benefit, be it control or power. But the problem I see is that people online see that and then they challenge my environmental works as pointless and say that you shouldn't taint your work with this because they only think of that. They're so shocked and surprised that some humans will try to manipulate an event to get personal gain, which always happens in planet, always happens in our species, that they then don't want to listen to any environmental stuff because it's all a scam. But it's not a scam. Habitat destruction's factual, it's happening. I'm watching it where I'm at. I'm restoring it where I'm at. I'm in the planning stages of getting that done. The use of oil is a stupid thing when it's destroying the planet, when we could do it with solar power if we just changed the way we were using industry. Now, on the other side of it, the reason we haven't gone to renewables is because those in charge of oil, who are pretty much running the show on the planet, don't yet have an ability to be in charge of renewables. But when they do, you better believe the change will come. Now, I don't believe there's a scarcity of oil either. I really don't actually believe that. But it's so integrated into the economy that it's gotten to this point that they are divisive about how they want to maintain that level of income and power and control over society. You know, bearing in mind that prohibition from Rockefeller came about because of the oil industry, so we know they're divisive. He did prohibition because people were brewing ethanol to run cars on, so he wanted a full alcohol ban as well, so as his oil could remain at a higher value in the US. That's a fact. So they do divisive things regarding that industry. But let's just pull this all the way back now I've said that and say this. If you think that the climate is changing naturally, okay, and that people are trying to manipulate that to get self-gain, then bench it. Okay, that's happened, it's over here, that's there. However, what if genuinely, because there are figures to show this, and I'm kind of on the fence due to it, we do need a change, and that change needs to be not necessarily about greenhouse gas emissions, but about habitat destruction. So we need to stop supporting industries like the huge animal agriculture, grain-fed animal agriculture industry, and the felling of rainforest to clear land for grass-fed in South America as well. We have to back away from that because after losing half of the world's forest in 70 years, we know that industry is a stupid thing. We have to stop doing that. We have to change our behaviours. We have to buy something made of hardwood once in a lifetime. We don't and then pass it on to our kids. It'll last 2 lifetimes, it'll last several generations, but we buy on based on non-utilitarian. So we change our behaviour to stop the demand, but if you turn around as a government and say, we're banning the use of this animal agriculture, these grain-fed animals, for the sake of the planet, you'll get rebellion, revolution, people who don't understand, people who think it's sinister, and it won't work. But that happens with everything on the planet. So what would you do as a world leader with your advisors if there genuinely was a problem with habitat destruction, which we know factually there is, and you needed people to stop? You wouldn't be able to ban it outright. You would have to give them the idea as their own. That's how the world works. That's how governance on this planet is working with media and TV. You drip feed the idea that the change has to come until the people accept the change as something they wanted. As a leader of a community here for many years of over 100 people, I could see things environmentally. For instance, women were cutting down trees and such to grow food in Feathersdale, and we couldn't sustain that. If I blanket banned said, I'm banning all of that, you're not allowed to do it, and offered no solution, they'd all take it very personal, it'll go into the ego, and they'll not want it. But if you talk to them all and say, look, Feathersdale's beautiful, we want the trees to remain, and we're going to try and find an alternative fuel source for us to be able to cook with, so you're not allowed to touch the trees anymore. If you have a few meetings, people adopt that as their own because you've given them the education they need to see the problem. And then when the change comes and you say, right, you can't use the wood anymore from the trees to cook, no one's offended by it because they've already accepted that this has to happen in their community. That's the same on a global scale. If you want a global scale of people to change its ways, you're going to have to drip feed the idea into the media. And that's why when people say things like Greta Thunberg is a shill, I always say, be very careful that you're absolutely positive about that. Because, yes, there's a greenhouse gas problem, and there's a big grey area here regarding it. But habitat destruction is a factual thing. And what if she is a child with Asperger's, because I know kids with Asperger's as well, and they could indeed do something like that because they get so focused you can't take the focus away. It's just unbreakable. It's amazing side effect, if that's the right word, of Asperger's. If she is just a child with Asperger's whose parents happen to have connections in the right places because she's an opera singer and thus managed to get in front of Parliament and thus got a name because she did something out of the ordinary for a child, then isn't there a possibility that the elitists said, we need to bring this message to the planet that we have to start looking after the environment, we have to stop felling trees, so on and so forth, we have to stop these industries that are wrecking the place. But if we do it outright as a ban, people are going to want to rebel. Factual. We know this. But if we slowly drip feed society collectively the idea that this has to happen, eventually they'll adopt it as their own and they'll accept that the change has to come, and there'll be very little to no rebellion when it does come. Greta might just be a normal child who the powers that be allowed through into the system. She might not be a shill. She might genuinely have that message in her heart and they just let her through because it serves their means. Other people think that she was trained to do what she's doing as a point of example. These are the sort of tactics people believe are being used. Other people say that she's completely innocent and it's all genuine. So I find that difficult because the establishment media is a very difficult thing to crack. That's just a fact. So the question is, though, in among there is the state of the mind that's thinking it. And the thing is, if you immediately said, she's in the mainstream, this is sinister because it's related to climate change and climate change is bullshit, so you made the whole thing a sinister ploy. If you never once evaluated or researched, maybe this is genuine and maybe the leaders need to change things so they're drip feeding us information so our subconscious and our collective conscious adopts the need for that change as our own. If you've never thought about that, then your mind is not in a very good place, because that is how the world works, and it should always come to the forefront of anything that you think might be sinister, as in a fake climate change ploy, etc. You should always think, is this actually just the elitists using a means to an end to make us adopt something that we actually need to change. Bearing in mind, to be elite you need a human species. Bearing in mind, to be elite you need a planet. They want this to be protected as much as we do. They actually want this to be safe. I don't agree that they should charge you to go into nature and stuff. Of course not, this is not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is they still need this planet. So not everything they do is sinister. Now, I know that because I'm quite well studied on it. Now, I did videos before about Agenda 21. I took them down, but I'm doing a video soon to explain all that. Agenda 21, currently Agenda 2030, was created by the Fabian Socialists. I had the world's largest, most watched series on Fabian Socialism. All of their divisive methods that they have, that the ends justify the means, wolves in sheep's clothing. They started and founded the London School of Economics, so they control the way economics is taught. They control the idea of inflation as a necessity instead of a tax, etc. These guys are very, very clever. And Agenda 21 is part of their stance for the planet. Is Agenda 21 purely about them manipulating humanity and controlling them? No, it's not. And I know because I've studied it. Even the people who set up Fabian Socialism, even the original founding fathers, you can read their autobiographies if you want to do some real research instead of just watching YouTube videos, and you'll see the nature of the people and what they were trying to achieve. And indeed, some of it had for all I don't have a lot of good things to say about the elitist agendas, etc., it had a very organic and beautiful want for the planet, and a lot of it was indeed about protecting the planet from our own destructive nature. And this is just a fact. Now, the way they do it, you might not agree with. The fact that they use the media to drip feed us ideas into our subconscious, you might not agree with. But to say that every single action they partake in comes from a state of pure evil and sinisterness is absolute tosh and nonsense, and comes from a paranoid, delusional state of consciousness, which ultimately was triggered and created on the planet, in my experience up to now, since September 11th, that fateful day. Really, this was the birth of this very paranoid consciousness. So, to pull it all back, the planet might be heating and cooling naturally, and people are trying to manipulate it. That's a fact. I say that they are, and I'd say that that's probably part of it, undoubtedly. But that doesn't change that human behaviour and human choices via the vote we make with our pound, euro or dollar or shilling in this part of the world where I am, is damaging the planet irreversibly in areas. It doesn't change the fact that we've cut down half of the planet's forests in the last 70 years. It doesn't change that 60% of the planet's species have gone extinct in the last 70 years. And this is all due to human interaction, and this is all factual. And this is all due to actions that we can change, and actions that are not necessarily being promoted as something to make money from, like, fuel taxes, etc. We can do something about that. And that's our duty to do something about it. Even if you think greenhouse gas emissions is a scam involving Al Gore, blah, 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 you still have undeniable habitat destruction. And anybody who is saying that you don't has not travelled and has not looked at the world around them. Because I've seen it. I've seen in Bwindi, the most protected and ancient of forest, how it's just clear and full of maize fields, etc., right up to the boundary, and it's horrible. And it's sad because there's no necessity for that. And the reason there's a concentration of population there is industry, because of the European logging companies that brought all of the people close to the forest whilst they were chopping it down so they could sell bits of furniture, which probably went into second-hand shops and end up smashed up and burnt because nobody looks after it. Sacred beings, trees giving us their bodies, and how often do we keep all the wood stuff? Anything wooden I get, I try to keep for a lifetime or more if I can. So if some humans are manipulating the change in climate, which is natural, to gain benefit from money, power, control, whatever, so on and so forth, a new way for the planet to be governed, that still is only a tiny fragment of the problem of the environment. And you can bench it and you can say, okay, so don't get involved in that crap. Don't get involved in carbon if you don't believe it. But get involved in protecting the forest. Get involved in protecting the species. Get involved in not using plastic. Get involved in protecting and being conscious of Mother Earth. And just because you suspect some people are doing something to manipulate that change to gain money, which happens in every single change on the planet, doesn't mean that you then blanket turn your back on all environmental studies, works, etc. I can see that we do need changes in industry, and animal agriculture is part of it, and thus I can understand why the media is trying to slowly introduce the idea that we should eat more plants because it's more sustainable. I can get that, because if you outright banned it, you would get revolution. If you slowly drip feed it, people will adopt it as their own. Now, the question is, are you absolutely certain that they are doing that only for a sinister means? Or are you truly studied enough, as I am on Fabian socialism, who are behind Agenda 21, to know that actually there is some very organic, loving wants for the planet behind it, and thus there's a possibility that what they are doing is actually genuinely needed to make that stopgap in the industry, so as humanity can start restoring the ecosystems and starting to live side by side with Mother Nature instead of with it underfoot. So that was all. Little incoherent, but I hope it makes sense to you all. Right, I'm gonna go rest now. I had a burst of energy today, but I'm all about out of it now. God bless, guys. Bye. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, as it really helps us to grow the channel and with it help more children here in Tanzania. Also, don't forget you can support our work by sharing with children in crisis here. Be it sharing for a particular need or even sharing one-on-one support for education, housing, food and medical care. It can be done for as little as the cost of a cup of coffee a week back in the West after all. Just visit www.sharetanzania.co.uk to find out more. Lastly, remember you can also support us via Patreon, www.patreon.com/featherstail, and help keep us here in Tanzania to continue our work. The links for the website and for the Patreon are in the description box of this video. Love and light, guys. See you soon.